Most of us have heard buzzwords like creative writing and art competition throughout our lives as students, haven't we? I, for one, have always been left bewildered by these terms. Ever since I was a child, I could never really understand what the word creativity truly means. Back in first grade, when a few of my classmates made a drawing of a mountain with its reflection in a river, I was told that that is creativity. Later on, when I wrote essays with long and fancy words like perplexed and venerable, I was told that that is creativity. Throughout my life, I have received various definitions and explanations of the word creativity, but have failed to come to terms with any of them. I've seen people win art competitions at the smallest of platforms just by copying a picture from the internet, and they still call themselves creative. I've seen people searching for words relentlessly in dictionaries just to make sure that one line in their so-called poem rhymes with another, and they still call themselves creative. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I'm not going to rant about how the world has lost creative and innovative thinkers, and I'm not going to give you 5 steps on how to be creative. But rather, I will be busting a few myths about creativity, enough to leave you all with your own definition of creativity. Myth number 1, being unique means being creative. Almost a year back, I had started to explore the world of jazz music. I was particularly intrigued by this genre called avant-garde jazz, as I always found experimental and weird things interesting. This led me to come across an artist called Charles Mingus. At first, I was only attracted to his music, but one day, I decided to find out what he was as a person. While reading up on him, I saw a quote that I remember to this date. Creativity is more than being different. Anybody can play weird. That's easy. What's hard is to be as simple as Bach. Making the simple complicated is commonplace, but making the complicated simple, awesomely simple, that is creativity. Even today, this quote leaves me at a loss for words. I've observed that the weird and the unusual attracts people, and those who pursue it are often considered to be creative. I found this to be illogical and was relieved to see that someone else was also of the same view. Soon, I started using this quote as a checkbox whenever I use the word creativity. And when I think about it, this quote is absolutely true. It's so true that it makes me want to cry. Gordon Ramsay is an epitome of this outlook. He's considered to be one of the greatest chefs of all time because by perfecting even the simplest of dishes like fried chicken or scrambled eggs, he's left the world shocked with his skill. Minimalism, that is scrapping something down to its bare essentials, is a necessity for creativity. Not only does it result in a perfect output of one's inner creative desires, it also restricts people from going beyond their own desirable output to fulfill someone else's. What this means is that when an idea is presented with minimalism, it's presented as a passion. But when its output is unnecessarily stretched to a point where someone else is impressed, the doer's own original and raw thought process fails to shine. It gets covered by something which somebody else finds pretty. History is an example in itself to prove whether the minimalist or the gaudy artist excels. Myth number 2, creativity is directly proportional to the material gain. I've always wondered why people are so attracted to creativity. A long time back, I had observed that people must have thought that it leads to popularity or fame. Horrified by this objective to romanticize creativity, I delved deeper into my questions and found it to be satisfactorily disproven. The poet Charles Bukowski is someone who I really admire. His poetry has always left me inspired, and I find it to be liberating. In his poem, So You Want to Be a Writer, he says, if it doesn't come bursting out of you, in spite of everything, don't do it. He also said, if you have to sit for hours staring at your computer screen or hunched over your typewriter, searching for words, don't do it. And if you're doing it for money and fame, don't do it. Charles Bukowski was a man who lived an impoverished life. This influenced his work, and he often wrote about the working class and the poor conditions of people living in America. Despite all of this, he said things like if one wants to be a writer for money and fame, he or she should not do it. Don't you wonder why? Charles Bukowski received his purpose in life through poetry. His thoughts, his feelings, and his ideas were vomited out in paper, and he still remained happy despite being poor. People have this preconceived notion that money usually brings happiness. Sure, the idea may be true more often than not, but I think that this desire should not cloud one's emotional and metaphysical desires in life, like creativity. I've seen people writing poetry using the most arbitrary words just to make sure that every line rhymes. I have also seen people complimenting them. I cringed whenever this happened. It made me think that people are willing to show themselves in a form that isn't truly theirs, only to receive compliments which make themselves feel that they have a certain talent or interest. It is my opinion that creativity does not lead to the material gain. And even if it does, it should not be romanticized for it, as this undermines the value of true creativity. Myth number 3, creativity is an act. When I think of creativity as an act or how it can be implemented, there are two thoughts which come into my mind. One is how there's a stereotype that creativity is an inborn talent, and another is how people often think that creativity can be quantifiable. In this segment, I wish to bring to light how the two are connected. So do you all remember how in chemistry we studied that matter can neither be created and nor be destroyed? I think this is closely similar to how creativity works, isn't it? Except creativity can always increase. A person is born without creativity and in his or her life works towards accumulating it. The person can never lose his or her stock of creativity, but can always gain it. Now, the fact that creativity is considered to be an inborn talent makes me feel extremely sad. Because not only does it bring down hope in people, it's also wrong. It's the source which makes people think that creativity is quantifiable. One of the prime examples of this notion is the existence of competitions. Haven't we all been a part of them? So competitions which try to judge one's competence to make a contribution to the world and attempt to measure their creativity are some of the evilest creations made by man. They start with setting a bar for creativity. Then they come up with an arbitrary method just to get people to reach this bar. Whoever reaches the closest is considered to be the most creative. Sure, one may have the ability to be more creative than others, but competitions like these generate both inferiority and superiority complexes among people. And this is why society exists with multiple barriers and the world fails to progress collectively. Creativity and innovation are essential to the future, and this ideology merely destroys them. Myth number 4, creativity in the real world. Now, with the last segment of this talk, I wish to talk about the most important aspect of the aforementioned problems, their effect. So, it is my firm belief that the world we live in is one of the main reasons why creative output is depleting. Is one of the main reasons why creative output is depleting. There are so many socio-political barriers like political correctness and offense, which invoke fear among those who merely have a passion to create bursting out of them. A poet or an artist who simply wants to elicit his or her feelings on paper is shunned and mocked by society if it finds the slightest of things offensive. This is the reason why genius is hard to find today. 10 years back, a British satirical TV show called The Office came out. With the intention of humor and humor in itself, multiple jokes were cracked which are now considered offensive. In my opinion, this show is a pure example of genius in terms of writing, acting, direction, and overall humor. Imagine if the show was to come out only a few years later and would have been deemed as politically incorrect. The world would be at a loss. Not only for a TV show which is extremely hilarious, but tons of fresh, creative minds just waiting to share their ideas. Another place where shunning of creativity is seen is in some educational institutions. Fortunately, DPSRKPuram is not one of them. So now with a regressive and lifeless system to go about things, brilliance is shot down every second. This is the reason why people like Mark Zuckerberg and Steve Jobs were not great students, only because their dreams were much bigger than those set by someone else. They decided to go wherever their mind wanted to, without caring the slightest of what society thought. Their passion to create led them to change the world drastically. And their acts have not only satisfied the entire world, but have calmed the passionate storm to create, roaring inside them. So let me recapitulate what it is that I have shared today. First of all, I talked about a common opinion that is being unique means being creative, and First of all, I talked about a common opinion that is being unique means being creative, and explained how I felt it was wrong based on my observations and experiences. Secondly, I talked about how creativity should not be romanticized in order to receive the material gain, as this blurs the importance of pure and raw creativity. In this third point, I talked about how creativity is considered an inborn talent and thought to be quantifiable, although it's neither. In the last point, I talked about the most important aspect of the three main problems mentioned in this talk: their effect. That is how creativity is shunned and mocked by barriers created by political and some educational institutions, and this leads to a loss in creative output. As I come to the conclusion of this talk, I hope that my objective to make you all creative enough to come up with your own definition of creativity has been accomplished. Thank you.